The Barberspan 500 in the Maysfields of the Western Transvaal is always one of the highlights of the South African Off-Road Championship. This year, the Barberspan formed the second round of the National Championship. Victory in the Rustenburg 400, the opening event of the season, gave Castrol Toyota dealer team player Cassie Coetzee and Richard Leek an early lead in this year's production vehicle championship. Going into the Barberspan 500, they held a narrow lead over reigning champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. The time-frame Nissan Sani pair of Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak were expected to put in a strong challenge, but ran into early problems.
We started the time trial and we had a puncture about 3 k's out, so we stopped and we fixed that. And then we've lost power. It'll rev to about 3,500–4,000 and it just stops, just goes dead. We can't quite work it out. We've changed the management system, but it's still exactly the same. So we're not quite sure what to do at this time.
After their win in the Rustenburg 400, Springboks Cassie Coetzee and Richard Leek were full of confidence in the Castrol Toyota Hilux Turbo. Springbok RP Renica, with wife Thelma doing the navigating in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser, were also among the hot pre-race favourites. After a 50-kilometre time trial to determine start positions, there was the usual late-night activity in the pits. For reigning champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden, race strategy was a simple matter.
Strategy, we're going to go. Not going to play. Fast as we can.
Barker and Redden were first crew away, followed by Coetzee and Leek.
Well, I can take it calm. For the first 200 kilometers, the people opened the gates and taking the grass seats away in the road. And then the last 50 we can try to make up. And we should be in the front by this afternoon.
The competition in this year's production vehicle category is tougher than it's ever been. A tremendous battle was expected to develop between Castrol Toyota frontrunners Coetzee and Leek, the Renica husband and wife team in the Bankfin Toyota, and Barker and Redden, who desperately wanted to chalk up their first Barberspan victory. Barker and Redden were setting a cracking pace at the front of the production vehicle field, with Coetzee and Leek in hot pursuit in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. They in turn were being chased by RP Renica, who farms in the area and is a Barberspan specialist, and wife Thelma in the Bankfin Toyota Land Cruiser. Also involved in the early battle up front were Cecil and Michael Fincham in another Toyota Land Cruiser. Not far behind them, in a Land Cruiser of older vintage, were Jannie Visser and Johan Bester, who looked as though they'd settled into an early rhythm. Less than 50 kilometres from the start, the race was over for Cassie Coetzee and Richard Leek.
We seem to have a compression problem with the engine. It's blowing out oil, and it's not worth messing a good engine like this up, so unfortunately we're going to have to give this one a miss.
Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover were unaware of the drama behind them and were continuing to push as hard as they could. The radio link between RP Renica and wife Thelma in the navigator's hot seat had broken down, but Renica knows conditions on the Barberspan like the back of his hand. The Bankfin Toyota was slowly starting to put pressure on the leaders. Behind the leading pair, Jannie Visser and Johan Bester were a little more cautious, but were still going along steadily. The Barberspan is a long and grueling race, and Visser and Bester were intent on not putting too much stress on the aging Land Cruiser. In Class F, it was the Toyota Hilux of Niels Lemmer and Henry Kirstein that was setting the early pace, with some good battles developing throughout the field. Lemmer and Kirstein were being chased by Hein Grobler and Charles Wolmerans in another Toyota Hilux. Grobler and Wolmerans were also mixing caution with aggression and had moved to the front in Class G in the superbly turned out Hilux. As is always the case, the Barberspan provided a mixture between slow and flat-out sections. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Buerta were slowly working their way through the field and were out in front in Class F in the Nissan. The Barberspan was run over 2 laps of around 250 kilometers, and first to arrive at the service point at the completion of lap 1 were Arpi and Thelma Reinicke in the Bankford Toyota Land Cruiser. The Reinickes have moved ahead of the Video Sport SVM Land Rover in the hands of reigning SA champions Cliff Barker and Mike Redden. The Barker-Redden combination lost valuable time when they strayed off the route, with other top crews running into the same problem. Out in front, Arpi and Thelma Reinicke were slowly starting to take a tight grip on the race in the Bankford Toyota Land Cruiser. After winning the production vehicle category with fellow Springbok Lucas Dreyer in last year's Barberspan, Reinicke was on course to make it 2 in a row on home territory. The Reinickes were still not able to communicate with each other via their helmet radios, but this was hardly a major problem. Behind the Reinickes, the Barker-Redden combination were pushing as hard as they could in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. With the race decided on corrected time, the pair were forced to go for broke in an effort to try and catch Arpi and Thelma Reinicke, who were leading the race on the road. Jannie Visser and Johan Bester had also stepped up the pace in the older Land Cruiser, but were starting to come under pressure from Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Botha in the Nissan Safari. Although they had a tight grip on the race, Arpi and Thelma Reinicke couldn't afford to relax. Where races are decided on corrected time, crews cannot lose concentration and coast along. Over a 500-kilometer course, it's almost impossible for teams to keep track of the opposition, and the only solution is to go as fast as you can for as long as you can. Cliff Barker and Mike Redden had taken up the challenge to try and catch the Reinickes on the road, but had their work cut out for them. Barker was starting to push the Land Rover to the limit. Both Barker and Redden were keen to beat the Reinickes in their own backyard, but time lost in the first of the 250-kilometer loops was a major disadvantage. The Jannie Visser-Johan Bester combination were third on the road and still going strong in the Land Cruiser. Still running strongly were Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Botha in the Nissan Safari, which had lost its bonnet somewhere along the way. Van der Merwe and Botha had taken a firm grip on Class F and on corrected time had moved ahead of Jannie Visser and Johan Bester. Also on a charge were Burley Arthur Abraham and Stratford Vogt in the Video Sport SVM Range Rover. The pair started in 50th position after running into fuel filter problems on the time trial, and were another crew forced to throw caution to the winds. The situation was still looking good for Arpi and Thelma Reinicke. With the Bankford Toyota Land Cruiser running like clockwork, the pair was still first on the road, but on corrected time were maintaining the gap between themselves and Cliff Barker and Mike Redden. Barker and Redden were still pushing the Video Sport SVM Land Rover to the limit. Although matters were looking pretty relaxed in the cockpit of the Land Rover, Barker and Redden were in a go-for-broke situation. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Botha in the Nissan Safari had moved ahead of Jannie Visser and Johan Bester on the road. The impressive performance had put them into third place on corrected time, and they were way out in front in Class F. The van der Merwe brothers, Hein and Wynand, dominated Class E in a Toyota Hilux, and there was further success for Toyota in Class G, with an impressive performance from Hein Grobler and Charles Wolmerans in another Toyota Hilux. There was bad luck for Arthur Abraham and Stratford Vogt in the Video Sport Range Rover. After working their way into the top 5, the pair picked up a 60-minute penalty for missing the control point and dropped back to 7th. The locals had plenty to celebrate when Arpi and Thelma Reinicke came storming home in the Bankford Toyota Land Cruiser. The Barberspan 500 had once again proved to be a happy hunting ground for Reinicke. In the end, the Reinickes had nearly 25 minutes in hand over second place Cliff Barker and Mike Redden in the Video Sport SVM Land Rover. Galo van der Merwe and Eddie Botha took third place in the Nissan Safari, with Jannie Visser and Johan Bester and the van der Merwe brothers, Hein and Wynand, rounding out the top 5.
Thelma did quite well today because we were only gone for about 10 k's from the start and our Odo went. So we did the whole race without the Odo. And about 150 k's out, the intercom system also packed up, and then she had to shout at me, and that's all things that you lose your, first when a thing like that happens, you lose your concentration for 5 or 10 minutes, and until you get used to it, and then you gain that concentration to concentrate on the race.